Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Lunch and Lead series. My name is Sheila Matias. I'm the Executive Director of the Leadership Institute and the Society of Innovators at Purdue Northwest, and I am joined by some of my colleagues today. So we are here today to host someone I think is going to be really fabulous. As we all know, this is March's Women's History Month, and so we really want to spend some time talking about things that are important to women. We all know strong women, starting with our mothers, our main person who kind of guided us as a young person. So we all have women in our lives, whether they are not after our mother, there are sisters and partners and friends and aunties and all of that. And some of us have been influenced by strong women, and they have changed the course of our lives. We're being joined today by a very strong woman, and I would like to introduce her very quickly. Claire I'm just delighted to have her. So she responded to my pleading inquiry to join us today, and I'm just delighted that she is going to share some of her perspective and talent. She's a very gifted woman, and we are blessed to have her today. So Claire will tell us a lot about her journey, but I'll give you just a little flavor. She has developed a platform called Ladies Get Paid, which I'm just so interested to hear more about. It's a global platform. She has built a global community. She's an educator, an author, and the founder of Ladies Get Paid. She is the host of the John Hancock podcast, Friends Who Talk About Money, which I think is fascinating. I want to find that podcast. She's been highly sought after by Fortune 500 companies, where she works to coach on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. She's traveled the country teaching thousands of women how to negotiate millions of dollars in raises, start new businesses, and probably the most important for all of us, advocate for themselves in the workplace. She was named one of the 75 most influential financial leaders of 2021, and Entrepreneur Magazine added her to their list of 100 most powerful women. How impressive is that? She's obviously a young woman, and she's accomplished so much in her life already. The future should be wild. She has spoken at Harvard Business School, to Facebook staff and employees, at NASA, and at the United Nations. And she's appeared on Good Morning America and has been featured in the New York Times. So we are delighted to talk to Claire today. I also want to let you know that her book, we'll put a hyperlink in the chat, but her book is available at bookstores everywhere. And it's called, you can wave it for us. The book is Ladies Get Paid. And so we're delighted that you've joined us today to share your perspective and to help open our eyes to some new ideas and new thoughts. So Claire, welcome to Northwest Indiana and Chicagoland.
Wow, thank you. Thanks. And Sheila, of course I responded. You're so kind. I mean, you just flattered me for like 30 minutes here. So I appreciate you having me. And I usually teach when I'm asked to come and speak, but this time I'm going to be telling a little bit more of my story, but there are lessons to be had, and anything and everything related to career, money. If you have questions beyond what I'm going to be talking about today, I mean, please put it in the chat. I'm here for the next hour. And you can also get in touch with me afterwards. But let me go ahead and share my screen. Great, there's me. No need to read my bio again. Again, it's always, and by the way, you said I was young, not as young as you think, but I appreciate it. So I'm going to just brag for a quick second, only because I'm going to then unpeel the layers so you can really see what's going on behind the curtain here. So here's the impressive stuff, right? Ladies Get Paid. We started in 2016, about 100,000 members, more than 120 countries. We've exchanged over 2 million messages on Slack. We've hosted over 1,000 events. Our last in-person, so we were an in-person business. We'll talk about how we've pivoted a little bit later, but tons and tons of people want to come. I'm going to tell you how hard it was, starting with the beginning. So I'll just, I'm just going to be very transparent here. I never considered myself a feminist. At all. I think if you'd asked me what a feminist was, I probably would have said man hater, angry, right? Complete misconception, total misconception. And what's really kind of sad and devastating about it is my mother was the third class of women in college, but never really talked about it. and didn't really give me a heads up. We never discussed sort of gender power dynamics. We never really talked about inequality. It was sort of like whatever I dreamed of being, I could become, which is a really beautiful way of looking at your life, but it is also a very privileged one. Okay. It wasn't until I had a pretty sexist experience in 2015 that just woke me up. And I'm curious for anybody here, it doesn't need to be sexist or discriminatory or anything like that. But if you've ever had an aha moment where you can almost see there was the before time of your understanding of who you were in your life, and then something happened and there was an after. I think for a lot of us, it was the pandemic, but I'm going to tell you about my moment. Curious for anybody else, an aha moment, a before and after. Here was my before and after. Went to the south of France to an advertising festival. At the time, I was the director of marketing for a company called Working Not Working. Encourage you to check them out, workingnotworking.com. It's a professional network, mostly freelancers in visual communications who connect for work based on their availability. For a few years, for them. And then before that, I had been in the recruitment space. So I'll give you a little bit of my background there. We went to the south of France to an advertising festival to find clients, right? To find these companies who would pay for our platform. This is the party I went to. Very excited. I walk in. Now, the man is not in the picture, I don't think, but there was a guy there. He comes up to me, sticks out his hand, smiles, very innocent, and says to me, "Now, whose wife are you?" That was my aha moment. That woke me up. The rest of the week, I just had interaction after interaction where I was just not being taken seriously, or I was being objectified. Trying to navigate my way to take these conversations from a direction where I felt uncomfortable, not just into a place where I felt better, but to a place where I could close a deal. Because that's the thing that we don't talk enough about. When there's this gender power dynamic, when you need somebody to say yes to you, you are very limited to how you can respond if they say something like that man said to me. At the end of that, so one thing that happened during that whole experience that was really profound in the best way possible was I remember going to the women's restroom, and it was like all of the women at the festival were there exchanging business cards, basically hiding. And it was this profound experience of, wow, there is something very powerful when we all come together that I had never experienced before. Now, fast forward to at the end of the full week of being in the south of France, of what I felt would be so glamorous and exciting, I felt demoralized, really disgusted. I replayed these interactions, but the first thing I thought of was not what's wrong with these people who treated me in this way, right? In these interactions. No, my first thought was, what part did I play? I internalized it. I thought if I was being objectified, well, it must have been because I was too friendly or my skirt was too short. And I wonder if a lot of other people feel that way too, right? It's wonderful to be introspective, but I placed the blame first on myself. And then I started to reflect on my career. All of these experiences I'd had were, again, gender power dynamic, uncomfortable, sometimes pretty discriminatory, but oftentimes just kind of behind the scenes. Something that now I've come to understand is it's called microaggressions. But that wasn't a word that I knew then. I wrote an essay about it. I didn't feel comfortable publishing the essay. I was worried, again, that I might be labeled a quote, man hater, right? But I shared the essay with some friends who wrote me back and they said, wow, I have also experienced this. And I just want to be clear. The essay was about my trying to process what happened, my trying to process my role in it, my trying to process this immediate blame that I placed on myself. And these friends wrote me back and they said, oh my gosh, I've also experienced this. Do you mind if I share it with some of my friends? And then all of a sudden, those people were reaching out to me, and my email was my essay was kind of going viral in my inbox. Now, this was before Me Too. And there was no vocabulary we had around this other than nobody is talking about times that we feel uncomfortable at work. Now, I started to Google, and I'll never forget this. I remember Googling women inequality, the workplace. I mean, it's sort of funny now, right? Because again, we're all talking about it. And I uncovered these gaps that just blew me away. And my first thought was shame that I did not know this. Okay. So here are some really, if we want to start our conversation today in a very depressing way, here we go. It gets better. This presentation. But the statistic that really startled me the most was the fact that Hispanic women make closer to 55 cents to the dollar. If you have questions about the wage gap, I'm happy to go into it. it's a little complicated. So, we can talk about this after, but point being is we are not at all close to equity when it comes to leadership, money, whether it's the money we make as women or the money that we invest, or rather not invest, the debt that we carry. Women carry the majority of student debt in this country. And again, we're not making as much, we're not as investing as much. So we'll never catch up, it seems, right? And so I became, quite frankly, very depressed, because you look at this and it's systemic and it's structural and it's overwhelming. So for me as an individual, what could I possibly do to combat something like this? So nothing for a year, just went about on my business, but it was always in the back of my head. I also was starting to realize that I was more interested in not just helping people get the job, but really thrive in the job. Then this was my next aha moment. And again, I'd love everybody to be thinking about in their own lives, these experiences that they've had, these realizations that then have become kind of an inflection point for themselves. And the next inflection point for me came 1 year after. And it was a friend of mine came to me. She was a freelance art director, very, very talented. And she said that she recently discovered that she was charging so much less than her male counterparts. Now, for her, this wasn't discrimination. This wasn't the wage gap. It was two things: lack of information. So she didn't know what to charge. And number two, and this to me was most interesting, why did she not feel worthy of charging as much as her male counterparts? And because, again, at the time I was director of marketing for, a professional network, she said, is there something that you could do, to get us sharing, or, anything, salaries, conversation. And then I realized, oh, this was a way as an individual I could affect change in my life and the lives around me. If we talk about money, if we make sure we're each getting paid more, right, closing our own wage gap, that was the beginning step. So I organized an event. I called it a town hall, Women and Money. So it was leading up to the 2016 presidential election. I'd been hearing about these town halls, these candidates were hosting. I was very interested in a way where people could share stories, a way that we could start to be comfortable getting outside of our comfort zone when it, came to talking about something as taboo as money. I also picked money as the topic because I knew that this would be more than money, right? It would really become a conversation around power and worth and value, and all those statistics that I just showed sort of ladder up into that. I host this event, 100 people came. It was in an apartment in New York. You can see we were all sort of sitting on each other here. And I was just blown away. It was very clear that not only did these women not ever really talk to each other about money and power and worth, they hadn't really talked to themselves about it. And that, yes, they had questions, that things that they wanted to learn, but there was also a place for catharsis, right? To just feel okay, to feel connected. And I remember walking out of that night, and a friend, this girl, she pulled me aside, she said, you should do this. Kind of like looked at, waved the room, you should do this. I was like, well, what is this? She goes, I don't know, but you should do it. I got home that night, just like with so much energy. And I thought the only next step, and let this be a lesson to all of us, it's just about the next step. Okay. You can have a big vision, but that's overwhelming. What is the next possible step that I can take from here? And it wasn't to plan another event. It wasn't to create a company. These things are too big. It was, let's create a Slack group. Curious in the chat, how many of y'all are familiar with Slack? It's technically a tool that's meant for internal communications at a company. But I thought, this makes sense as a community building platform because you can have different channels, as you see here on the left-hand side, sub themes that kept coming up at the town hall. So I started to put that in here. I invited everybody who came. I said, let's continue to talk. Let's continue to talk. And I watched it over the next couple of weeks. First of all, everybody wanted to invite their friends. So that was, okay, I'm not the only one who, is itching to have these conversations around work and money. The topic that was just massive in the Slack group was salary negotiations. This was clearly a place where folks had so many questions. They're Googling this information. There's a lot out there, but it was very academic, very academic. Again, 2015, okay, people weren't talking about it as much as we are now. As I'm watching this happen, this was my last aha moment. I should start hiring coaches, career coaches, money coaches, wellness coaches, and finding them space, finding them an office, inviting people from Slack. You had the conversation here. Let's now learn, split the ticket sales. That was Ladies Get Paid. I quit my job. I want to be clear. I'd had a failed startup before. Shouldn't say failed because it has now turned into Ladies Get Paid, but I had been around the block. I'd seen how basically what not to do. I had savings. So I went ahead, I quit my job. This was now 2016. We incorporated. I began to host town halls every month, different themes, and I went across the country. So as I was hosting, this is in New York, you noticed that we were doing everything in the round. I think it is so, and I can talk about virtual events since clearly we've pivoted, but I think what was so special about these first events was that it was really done in a peer-to-peer facilitation. So I would have certain folks speak first, share their stories first based on the theme. And then I would say, raise your if this resonates with you, if you have a story to share, and then to pull the stories into, a place of like focus, it would then be, do you have a question for the room? Can somebody answer? Or based on your experience, what did you learn? And it was like what was happening in Slack, right? This peer-to-peer sharing, this stories, these catharsis that would then turn into what needed to be action. Because if you don't walk out of something with a next step, where does the energy go? It can sometimes go from feeling really inspired to actually feeling really depressed because there's that gap between sort of the excitement, of the inspiration to then, well, what about me in my life? What do I do? And as I'm hosting these in New York and the Slack group is growing, I begin to get emails from women all around the country saying, can I host these events? And my response was, I haven't made enough mistakes to teach you how to do this yet. Let me keep doing this. I think I did, maybe it was about 6 months in New York. We would do a town hall. We would do a town hall workshop. And finally said, I think I'm ready. I went to 19 cities. Okay, let's just see. Okay, I went to 19 cities. Well, let me actually get the 2016 election happened. So maybe we'll just jump there. And then that was the catalyst for me going across the country. It was both people reaching out and also me realizing the Ladies Get Paid mission and message, right? Of wanting to close these gaps, but starting with individual education, right? And then community support. How does that get experienced and expressed around the country? What does it look like in Omaha, Nebraska versus, Williamsburg, Brooklyn? Okay. So this is some of our wonderful members. Okay, so we hosted an event. You see what happened here. Okay, now the turning point and timing is everything. For anybody who's had their own business before, I never want to say luck because I do think that we make our own luck, but I think in an organization like ours, this is, a social mission, there's the zeitgeist, right? And we've certainly been leading the zeitgeist, I think, on, women's empowerment, work and money, but there was also the political zeitgeist that was happening at the same time that we were coming up. And after the 2016 presidential election, I hosted a town hall where I featured, it was a little bit different. I featured a woman who had been, the National Deputy Director of Operations for Hillary Clinton. And the town hall with her was twofold. One, it was about what is it like when you think you're headed to the White House, but now you're unemployed. So it's kind of like her own sort of career path as a microcosm of all of us wondering, well, what happened? And then the other part of the town hall was an exercise that I did with everybody. And I called it the Workplace Bill of Rights. It was, how do we make sure that the things that are important to us at work get protected, right? What are our values when it comes to the workplace? And it's funny because we talked a lot about workplace flexibility, right? Being able to work from home, which now it's like, that's a given, right? That's sort of like the baseline. And part of the Workplace Bill of Rights, and this really did kind of change the trajectory of the direction that we went in. Part of the exercise here was dividing up everybody at the town hall, and I think there are about 150 people, into these groups and having them make a list of their deal breakers, right? Not just the things they wanted to see at work, but the things that they needed to see at work. And then all the groups came together and we shared. And what was so interesting is everybody had the same lists, but as their deal breakers, which was basically the 1, 2, 3 at the top of those lists, things that they needed to see at work, they were all different. And we created this Workplace Bill of Rights, this cute little handbook that we distributed. And it was this really beautiful exercise in just making sure that we don't let the world happen to us, right? That we do have a say, but it has to be together. And then this is when I went across the country. I did 19 cities, same town hall, work and money. The deal was with each of these cities, I only went to the ones where the women who would reach out to me and they would commit to hosting one town hall every quarter. Okay. And I went, one night I did Grand Rapids, Michigan. The next night I did Detroit, Michigan. Saw really interesting things. Across the board, we have way more in common than we do otherwise. I also got the same email after every single event. And the email was always, I thought I was the only one. Because that was the most profound thing at each of these town halls. And this is why I loved the format of having it be more, sort of peer-to-peer, is when somebody would share this thing that they experienced at work or in their life, right, where they carried some sort of shame around it, right, and they expressed vulnerability. The shame was because they had never shared it before and so thought that they were isolated in that experience. But no, it was everybody, just like that original essay, the email in my inbox, right? Me too. So here we had San Francisco. This was Chicago, LA, Boston, Seattle. Happy to talk about other, all the various things. I would say that the thing that was most different would be, what people wore and sometimes the way that they express themselves. There was some just kind of personally very interesting sort of cultural misunderstandings and if anyone's from the Midwest here, which I think we are, in Minneapolis, I remember walking out of that town hall and thinking it was a total disaster. Worst town hall I ever did because everybody was silent. What's the point of a town hall if nobody speaks, right? And not only did I think that it went terribly, I thought maybe I shouldn't even do ladies get paid anymore. Then the next morning I wake up, I get an email from somebody who was there who said that it had changed her life. And I said, I'm totally confused. I thought this, nobody shared. Did it not? I thought it didn't go well. And she said, no, it's cultural. To her, she said it was Midwest nice. They thought they were being polite by not speaking up. So I also learned a lot about myself as I did this, and also learned, as universal as the desire is to want to be and to have more in our lives, that the word feminism, just as I had kind of misunderstood it, right, those years ago, is also a word that carries weight in different ways. That in Omaha, Nebraska, I was told, Tulsa, Oklahoma, my bad, was told that, feminism is called the quote, other F word. Okay. But yet ladies get paid still resonates. So, I can talk about kind of how we've expanded virtually now, but it was so necessary for me to go across the country to understand sort of where the energy was. Where did people laugh or cry or sigh or snap, right? You can't see that online. Like you can see the data, which was Slack, right? Now 2 million messages have been exchanged. All of our programming has come from what we've seen in Slack, but the feeling, right? The feeling that is going to change, I think, how you communicate your message. And I could only learn that from being, outside of my bubble, my New York bubble. Then this was the next aha moment. Big aha moment. We got sued. Sued for gender discrimination by a group of men's rights activists. Yes, that is a real thing. And yes, it does sound funny unless you're the one who sued. So let me tell you a little bit about this, because this was also a major turning point in our business and, who I am. Okay. So we, off of those town halls, we had these chapters in these 19 cities. These women would host events. And at the time, we were saying in order to attend a town hall, you needed to be female identifying or non-binary, right? Because the whole premise was getting folks to feel really comfortable, to be transparent and vulnerable with each other about workplace issues. Oftentimes, it was because of how they were perceived, right? If they were looked at as a woman, they may be treated in a certain way. And I wanted to give them, a space to talk about that. Not realizing that, well, that is discrimination. Never crossed my mind, because I thought, well, the purpose is good. I'm a good person. I'm trying to close these gaps. But there's a group of men, the National Coalition of Men, and they have sued over 300 groups. This is what they do. I get a notification 1 week before our first conference that we hosted, a notification that in 2 cities where we had events, one in Los Angeles and one in San Diego, that we were being sued. And not only was Ladies Get Paid being sued, I was personally being sued. The venues that hosted us, the sponsors, food and bev sponsors, and then 6 of our volunteers. I shouldn't call them volunteers because we do pay everybody who works with us, but these are our ladies get paid ambassadors. 6 of them were named. This is obviously devastating. We have no funding at all. It's just myself. I had gotten somebody to quit her job recently to come on board to help me. This happens. Okay. Obviously it is devastating. And the first thing I thought, just like that time in the south of France, when I was asked whose wife I was, I thought, did I cause this? I mean, I did. I made this choice to make it, specific to our gender. And was I a discriminant? I'm a discriminator. I also put our community in harm's way. I was responsible for those 6 women getting sued. So much guilt. And I'm curious for anybody here, if you want to jump in the chat, where guilt, has played a role in your life. This was a big, it was very debilitating. Okay. Very debilitating. It's also, where do you begin? Where do you begin? What's your responsibility here? I don't even think I knew a lawyer. I had any lawyer friends. Long story short here, and if you are curious to learn more, we actually created a whole website around this. I never waste an opportunity. So ladiesgetsued.com, encourage you to check it out. You will go down a rabbit hole and you'll get very mad. But for a full year, I couldn't talk about it. And it took a full year because it took them almost a year to serve me, even though they served the 6 women, the venues, the sponsors. I wasn't served. So we were in this holding pattern where we couldn't do anything. And I finally got served on the day of the Women's March. So there's other things that have happened within that full year, a lot of intimidation. This was, yes, a way, these guys do this to make money, but it was also ideological. They believe in this stuff too. And so this was getting very, very intense. And finally, at the end of it, we settled. Can't go into, obviously detail here, but if anybody wants to learn more about what it's like to be sued under a civil rights law, it is, if you were the one being sued on a civil rights law and you decide to go to court and fight but lose, it's not the damages that cost money. It's that you have to actually pay for the legal fees of the other side. Okay. That was the concern. What were the legal fees that they were going to claim? We couldn't gamble that. We just didn't have the money for it. Not that we had the money to pay a settlement either, but there was no precedent that had been set, because even though they'd sued 300 other organizations, everybody settles. Everybody settles. And again, I can talk about this later if somebody's, if you're all more interested in hearing about it. But point being, we settled. We are out of business. We are like on the precipice of out of business. We can't afford this. So we need to tell the community. So I had to basically go to the community. I had to do with them what I teach them to do, which is to ask for money. And there was a lot of, again, guilt and shame around that, and I'll never forget, we made this announcement and we created a crowdfunding campaign. And we said, if you want to see us in business, you're going to have to give us money. Well, we're still in business. So it worked. We raised over $116,000 in 3 weeks from over 2,000 people. Still incredibly difficult. This sounds like an amazing experience. It was the best and worst thing I've ever gone through. We were able to get a ton of press. We just looked at this as basically an unplanned, extremely intense, lots of medication needed marketing campaign. And that's how I kind of see, whatever experience you're going through, if it's not good, just ask yourself, how can I make this work for me? And sometimes it's just, you've learned something and that's how you're going to make it work for me. Man, we squeezed, talk about lemonade out of lemons. We're like, we're going to make money from this lemonade. And we did. And out of that campaign, and again, I can talk more at length about sort of the power of networking here, but got an agent, and I got my book deal. It's not about the men, although I do thank them in the acknowledgements, but if the lawsuit hadn't happened, this book would it would have happened at some point, but not now. So, again, the worst thing that ever happened to our business ended up becoming the best thing that happened to our business. COVID, another horrible experience. It's like every 2 years, we just keep getting pummeled here. COVID happens. Our conference, we do an annual conference. There had been 1,000 women who came to it. And it was only, I think, 3 or 4 months later that COVID happened. And so we are effectively, again, out of business. We are an in-person company. Here's the thing, though. If you have a service that people need and they're willing to pay for, you have a business. So for us, that was still the case. We just were going about it. We were serving that need in a way that was technically out of business. So we had to think fast about how we were doing things. And which of course was, this was the conference. This was our last hurrah before almost going out of business. And so what I did was just like going back, the town halls. Every month I hosted what I called BYOL, bring your own lunch. It was, let's get on a Zoom call and let's share what is happening in your life. What are you scared about? Where can we support each other? We would do these breakouts where it was ask offer. So if anybody's looking for kind of a networking, I had experienced this at an event that I went to. A fabulous way to connect with other people at a networking event is for everybody to go around and say, here's an ask that I have. So something that I need. It's getting you into the habit of being vulnerable. It's getting to the habit of not feeling like a burden to ask for help. But then also here's an offer. Here's where, I have a network or an expertise, or I'm not sure how I can help, but here's my contact information. And it was an amazing experience, just the camaraderie. And it also gave us, it allowed me to see where the zeitgeist was moving and to learn and then pivot. For example, now hosting events, of course, online, but things like adapting to an online audience. And so started to, just began to do everything online. And this ended up being the best thing that happened to our business, because instead of spending so much time doing in-person events, which you can only scale so far, now we have hundreds of hours of content in a video library from all of our webinars, and we have an all access pass. So we added a way that we could monetize, which wouldn't have happened before. And we do our conference now online. This is our Institute for Higher Earning. I don't want to make this too much, into an infomercial. Ways get paid. I hate it when other people come on and they share their story, but it's really about why you should join. Of course, you should join. So maybe let me take a little bit from what I've learned here that hopefully is applicable to everybody here, whether, you have a full-time job, want to be an entrepreneur, or just live vicariously through those of us who do have businesses. I don't really recommend it. This is really, really hard to do. So the first thing that I learned is nobody is you. So and I'll make the analogy for if you want to create a company and you think, what do I have to offer that's different from anybody else? Just look at your thumb. Nobody has your thumbprint. Nobody has your life story, your experiences, and most importantly, your voice, because that was what I found lacking when I looked at the space of women's empowerment. I didn't find that anybody was expressing themselves in the way that I would, which would be kind of angry and fiery about the wage gap, in a way that would be sort of funny, in a way that would be real, in a way that would be industry agnostic. Okay. So I thought, you know what? No one is me. Same thing. If you have a full-time job and you are looking, for a new job and you're interviewing, nobody is you. So I go into a lot of work with the women in our community about really talking about sort of how they do things, who they are as part of their process, sort of, and not just what they do. The focusing on your who and why, it's obviously, throughout, from the election to getting sued to the pandemic, and everything in between, it's hard to stay motivated. Those experiences, in and of themselves have been motivators for sure. I mean, you've seen that big through line here is I'm, getting fired up and I take that fire as fuel, but it's also incredibly, and I think I used this word before, demoralizing also. Okay. So then how do I keep going? It always comes back to, who am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? That really helps with imposter syndrome, right? Times where I think, who am I to do this? Oftentimes when I'm getting stuck in that, it's because I'm focused on things that are really out of my control, that require other people's approval. So let me give you an example of that. In writing my book, I, really got paralyzed when I was focusing on, will I get on a bestseller list? Will people like this? Will my editor like this? Will I get canceled? Okay. Lived in total fear of that. And it wasn't until I really shifted it to imagining the person just opening the book and reading it. Who was this person? What was she experiencing? How was I making her feel? Then I made it even smaller. Then it was about myself, about in a given day, how can I be present in my writing? How can I find joy, right? How can I focus on the process, right? Because these are things that I had agency over. I don't want to use the word control, but it was something that I could actually do rather than waiting on the participation or approval of others. Just like when I walked out of that Minneapolis event, instead of thinking it went poorly because they were all quiet, since clearly that wasn't the case, I wish that I had made the focus more on what did I learn out of that experience? What were things maybe I would have done differently, right? If you're learning, you are growing. If you're learning, you are growing. And guess what? If you're not learning anymore, it is time to move on. So in your job, if you have just stagnated, that is proof to you that let's start looking at other opportunities. How to know if the next opportunity is right for you? Again, is this going to maximize your learnings? That's something I have to always come back to. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There's been lessons. It's much easier to give advice, I think, than take it. Sure, I'm not the only one who feels that way. So I'm in the, business of providing education and guidance to others. I have a hard time asking for help because I struggle with appearing. I'm worried I'm going to appear like I don't know what I'm doing, right? I have to be the leader. And that has, I think, stymied our growth and has also not allowed me to make deeper connections with people. So now I've created my own sort of Ladies Get Paid network where there are other similar, female entrepreneurs. We have organizations that are complementary to each other, and we have our own support group. So I do, again, I can't be the only one who's gives advice, but has trouble taking it themselves. But asking for help allows other people to feel good about themselves. It allows other people to, live vicariously through you, right? There's so many people out there who, maybe dream of having their own business, but for whatever reason they don't. But in their, in helping me, they then get to, kind of be an entrepreneur. So in the times that I have worried about appearing like a burden, it's actually not the case at all. Small steps lead to big change. I always have to go back to that because, again, the beginning, systemic, structural, these huge gaps. What as an individual can I possibly do? Okay, then that's the question for you. What can you do for you? And what can you do for somebody else starting on Monday? And anything that you have that's big, just break it down into all the possible steps, into a web, into a tree. And also figuring out when you make a step, can you see a result pretty quickly? Because if you can't, it's going to be hard for you to gain momentum. So just like in what I've created for the women in my community, having them get a raise, fantastic. That's tangible, right? But it might take them a year to get that. So what can I give them leading up to getting that raise that will show them that they're making progress? Okay. That's been huge. And then I'll tell another story before I go into like any questions that, this was like 4.5 years into, 20, 30 minutes. So hopefully I was able to kind of tie it all together for you and make it applicable to, anybody's story here. But, one thing that, in the Ladies Get Paid world, there was a woman, she really exemplifies kind of what I would love to see all of us do, but it exemplifies it in a really big way. She was a friend in college, reached out to me. I started to host events, and she said that she was really unhappy in her career and that there was a workshop that I was hosting called Get Unstuck in Your Career. And she was going to come to the workshop. And I was surprised that she wasn't doing well in her career because she was really stellar in college. We had worked at the Howard Thurman Center for Diversity together. But she was, had to make ends meet. She was working at a bar. She had student loans. She comes to this event, this how to get unstuck. Then from there, much longer story, which I'll, unless you want to go into detail, I can tell you about, but we'll fast forward to a town hall, probably a year and a half later. And the town hall, the theme was reinvention. And I was featuring stories of women who'd kind of rethought who they were and what they did for a living, right? And made bold changes. And after I have these women share, I asked, again, I said this to you all, stand up, something resonates with you, share your story. And this woman stands up. And she says, I have always wanted to run for office, but people who are like me, who look like me, don't run for office. She was probably 27 at the time. Her family was from Puerto Rico. She grew up in the Bronx, she was not wrong. People who look like her were not running for office. But she said she was going to do it. She said, I will run for office. And we all cheered. There were probably 100 of us in that room. I cried. I cried because, I knew her. I knew what her journey, but I also cried because she was declaring herself to do something that she was planning on. That's the thing. It's not like she said, I'm going to try to get a new job. She was going to run for office. What are the chances that she's actually going to get elected? She was going to run in New York in a district against an incumbent who was a much older guy, like I had been there for years, very powerful. So we cheered for the courage to declare yourself, A, to declare yourself, and B, to declare yourself something that you probably will not get. A full year later, she got it. And she became the youngest congresswoman ever. So that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So whatever you're, progressive or not, you may not agree with her, but let me tell you, the courage it took not only to run, but to stand up and say that she was going to do it. I will forever have goosebumps and be just so proud of her. So, it's not to say this is what we all should do. But I think the point is you want to make a change in your life. And then you see this is so much bigger than yourself. And, a rising tide lifts all boats. It's a cliche of an expression, but it's a cliche for a reason. And it's not hard to make a massive impact on somebody's life. Sometimes it just is telling a person you believe in them, or telling somebody, their manager, hey, Sheila's doing a great job, thought you should know, right? So I would love for all of us to think about, again, that one next step that you can take in your life that will have an impact on both you and somebody else. Here's my pitch, ladiesgetpaid.com/book. If you are working for somebody else, get them to pay for it. Okay, get them to pay for it. And of course, would love you all to join. Anybody and everybody is welcome, not trying to get sued again. So there you go. I know we've got about 15 minutes left. I'll stop sharing here. Happy to answer any questions. Let me just check the chat real quickly. Or Sheila, if if there's anything, you want to jump in with, I hope that you all, enjoyed my presentation.
Thank you. That's just, we've been chatting in the chat all the time that you've talked, because people have been so touched by your message. One that I think really would be a great conversation starter. How do you remain your strong self when so many frown upon women being strong and independent? I think every woman on this call can remember a moment when you felt frowned upon, and you even reference it in your own, you internalize the feedback before you externalize it. So share a little bit about that with us, please.
Yeah. So first, it's, and I talk about this in the book, it's, ask yourself why am I feeling this way, and who told me to feel this way? Okay. And that could be explicit, could be a person in, as you were growing up who said something to you in the expectations that you now carry about, how you should be, or it could just be subconscious, right? The media. There's this theory called the tyranny of the shoulds. Okay. This theory that says, we're oftentimes dictated by what we should or shouldn't do or be, because that is, our ideal self, right? And as women, we're, socialized to be accommodating, right? To put others first. Well, then what happens when you assert yourself? Does that mean that you are greedy? If you ask for more money, are you taking from others? Especially for women of color. Okay. If you're assertive, or are you now being perceived as aggressive? And there's this thing called the double bind. You will be penalized. So anytime that you think something's in your head, it's not. I'm telling you, it's not. Sometimes, again, I use that word microaggressions before, right? So sometimes they're so small that it is hard to pinpoint. But let me tell you right now, none of this is your fault. You have been raised to be this way. And that has become from our mothers. Okay. Again, my mom, third class of women in college. Right. Women couldn't get credit cards without a man until 1974. This stuff is pretty recent. So I do find myself kind of in between, like being very impatient, but also needing to have patience. Okay. So strong. There is a balance that needs to be had. Unfortunately, we teach salary negotiation. I would be remiss to not tell women that you do need to, quote, soften your ask. I hate it. I hate that I have to say this. But it's true. You may be perceived as aggressive. Women do this to other women just as much as men do. Does that mean you don't ask? Of course not. Does softening your ask mean asking for less? Absolutely not. But what it means is when you assert your worth, you also say, you talk about the team. So, you reiterate your enthusiasm. You come with, you really know how the business is making money and how you contribute to it, right? So this is bigger than you. You smile, open body language. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. But it's true. I have to acknowledge that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but clearly it's it's a rant.
Yeah, great answer. Good to know it's not only in my head. I think all of us, as you were speaking, were kind of like acknowledging the fact that, yeah, we've all felt it. It's happened to us, no matter where we are in our leadership journey.
Yeah. And something also that has happened in my life is I've had really wonderful mentors, male mentors. I still have them. And I have a few in my life who have been life-changing. But I've also had a number of male mentors who were just so wonderful to me. And then when, in a sense, I outgrew them and they started to feel threatened. And I've heard that actually from a lot of other women where it was, I was up and coming. They took me under their wing. They were fantastic. And then I'll never forget, one of them said to me, "I think you're getting too big for your britches." And it's like, oh, so these things change, right? Sometimes it's the folks who've been the best to us. That's a season in life changes both for us and for them. And now somehow it's not so great. So that's where I always say, whatever you're experiencing, first check yourself, have the introspection. But also, don't jump to the conclusion of blaming yourself, which I think has been a theme for me today. Sheila, would it be helpful if I went through the chat and just kind of responded to the question?
Jane asked a great question about with the labor shortage and opportunity for women to have their voices heard in regards to compensation, because the labor shortage is affecting opportunities for us as well.
Yeah. So what's sort of not funny, but leading up to the pandemic, we've been talking ad nauseum about workplace flexibility and the need for paid family leave. And then now everybody knows it, so even though the pandemic has really hurt women, I'm glad to hear that there's more of an urgency around these issues. Just to break down the wage gap very, very quickly for everybody. It's in large part, it happens when women have their first child. Which is called the motherhood penalty. Okay. And there's a number of reasons for this. When a man has his first child, it can be referred to as a fatherhood bonus. He tends to get a raise. Women tend to get a pay cut. Okay. Now, sometimes this has to do with the fact that we, quote, choose to take time off to have kids. And the reason I say, quote, choose is because it's a forced choice. If you don't have adequate leave, somebody's got to stay home. We tend to be the default caretakers. It's very expensive to have childcare. And if we're already making less at our jobs, maybe more, it's a financial decision to stay home. Okay. And then we're now off ramped and have a hard time getting back in to the workforce. And when we do, we're penalized, right? Or looked at we don't have as much time or as trustworthy. There's a lot here. Okay. There's a lot of factors, which feels overwhelming, but I also see, and this is where the positive part is going to come in and I'll answer your question. There's a lot of opportunity to address this stuff in a number of ways. So that's a piece of it. The other piece is the wage gap is because of what's called occupational segregation, where there are certain industries and roles that men and women tend to be clustered in, and the industries and roles that women are in are historically underpaid. So even within, the education system, majority of teachers are women, they're paid less, right? Majority of principals and superintendents are men, they're paid more. So conversation, well, why is that, right? Or an industry like interior decorating, it used to be male dominated, paid more, became female dominated, all of a sudden paid less. Software engineers, a lot of them used to be women, paid less. Now dominated by men, paid more. So things over time, it's a very interesting conversation to have. Now, to the question of, do you think women have a greater opportunity for their voices to be heard regarding compensation and other workplace issues? Yes, because companies are at a crossroads of rethinking company culture, how they hire, how they retain, and they don't know what they're doing. Trust me, I've talked to them. They are very open and very scared. So this is the time to be a leader, stand up and make suggestions, but you cannot do it by yourself, because this is when you could be perceived as being aggressive, right? It's also the chance that you're going to get something, a policy implemented. You have to show that there's a consensus here. So also getting, of course, men, on board. And I can talk about in a quick second a story of a woman who was able to get fantastic paid family leave passed and a parental ERG. And not only did that happen for her, she got it for a competitor company, and she got a raise and a promotion and a job, responsibility change, because she showed that this is what she should be doing because she was so effective. But it was all through the lens of how it helped the company make more money. That is where anytime you want something at work, whether it's a raise, a promotion, an opportunity to change a policy, it needs to be presented as a benefit to the business. And that means the bottom line. More conversation to be had about how you actually do that. But I say, yes, this is the time to make big changes in your life, in other, in companies, but we're not doing well. I mean, the gaps are getting wider right now because the people who were most vulnerable before the pandemic, which were women, particularly women of color, particularly single women of color, many of them in retail spaces, in hourly roles, those were getting decimated from the pandemic. The most vulnerable have been hurt the most because of the pandemic. So even though there's a great opportunity for change, who's going to make the change, right? Us, who are already exhausted and underpaid. So that's the other thing is everything that we talk about here, mental health is a big piece of this. Self-care is a big piece of it, Because how do you effectively advocate if you're, so strapped for cash and taking care of your kids? So I always want to remind people, if you have the privilege to speak up, please do. Rochella asked the question, now that your community is open to men, how many men actually join? I don't know. There's some, but they're pretty quiet. These guys who sued us have gone on to sue other folks. And I've been have helped other women through this process. We've also worked with the state of California, who's aware that this law is being abused. I've teamed up with the ACLU. So we've made some interesting inroads into helping folks, avoid getting sued in the future, but what do you do after? But our policy has changed. I don't know how many men actually are in it. So,
and then Adrian, a little bit about the imposter syndrome. There was a question further up about people feeling like they're imposters. They don't belong here. They don't belong in their field, and they don't belong in a successful environment. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh my goodness, that is constant. First of all, we're all making it up. Okay. I remember the first time I was looked at as a quote expert on the wage gap. I certainly was not, but you know what? No one was really talking about it at the time. So I thought, why not me? If not me, right? And I just need to, stay one step ahead and keep reading. So part of it's that. The other part is maybe for the next 2 weeks, take an inventory of times, when you're feeling this way, so you can really see if there's any patterns to it of when these feelings come up. Because what you may find is that it is somebody making you feel this way, or a certain environment that is making you feel this way. Okay. Also, when you start to break these things down, you'll then be able, well, A, it's making it objective, right? You're getting out of your head. And B, maybe there are certain things you need to do within the situation that's triggering this. So if you find that you're consistently feeling imposter syndrome in a meeting, okay, well, and you're worried, you're nervous about speaking up and presenting an idea. Well, that's too much pressure. So how about we just get used to, hearing the sound of our own voice? So maybe it's speaking up and saying, I just wanted to comment, like, Sheila, that was a great suggestion. Shout out to Sheila. Okay, well, that's one way to start, right? So I would say begin with the 2 weeks inventory of when does this actually happen. Then I would look at it as a wonderfully positive thing, in a sense, because if you feel like you're not sure if you deserve to be there, is it because you've never done this before and you're learning and you're new? Great. You're getting out of your comfort zone, writing a book, imposter syndrome. Of course I had imposter syndrome. I had in advance. People believed I could write this book. I'd never done it before. So it was sort of like, yeah, your imposter syndrome makes sense. But if I could embrace it and see it as a badge of honor. Now, of course, there's a difference between that and I'm still feeling like an imposter, even though I've done this a bunch of times, then that might be an indication we need to get some therapy. So that always, back to the point of like mental health needs to be a big part of this conversation. I also think having something on hand to remind you of the work that you're doing, so a picture of yourself as a kid or a mantra or some sort of like object that just reminds you this is, in your head, there may be truth to it. But that you need to speak to yourself with the kindness that you would speak to a child or to a friend. So I think, a theme here that I'm getting at is any way that you can get outside of your head and your feelings is a way to do this. But also again, nobody's you. So even if there are other, I don't know, equal, pay experts, they're not expressing themselves in my way. So same thing with whatever you're doing in your life and at work, there is literally nobody you. So you can't be an imposter.
I love that. That's something we can all grab onto. That's really great. Rachel, do you have anything? Makisha, Jane, Jason, anything before we close out? I think there was a question about the 3 characteristics of a successful woman getting paid their worth. I think that might be worth a few comments.
Okay, so I just put it into the chat, but I'll eliminate it. So first of all, I have a bit of a theory of why I think part of a reason why I think women are not getting paid as much is sure sexism, but also oftentimes we're in roles where the work that we do, it's not so obvious how we impact the bottom line. And so then it becomes more difficult for us to make the case for a raise or promotion, right? So like sales, dominated by men, you make a sale, clearly you've impacted the bottom line. Well, what about people who are in HR or marketing? It feels a little more nebulous, right? The connection to the bottom line. And those tend to be dominated by women. So I would say make sure that you are doing work that impacts the bottom line and that you are articulating it throughout the whole year. And that sometimes means you need to go and raise your hand for opportunities, because sometimes those opportunities, they're just given to the default, which could be the white man. Okay. So it's not just like, just do the work that's given to you, but maybe seek the work and articulate the work. Relationships are everything. Every job I've ever gotten has come through a relationship. So you need to constantly be networking internally, externally. If you wait until you need something, it's too late. Also, by the way, being strategic in your career, building strategic relationships and being authentic and genuine, they are not mutually exclusive. I have a whole chapter in my book about networking. Also, it's the relationships, the work that you do at your company, you need people to amplify it. You need people to advocate on your behalf. Decisions are being made in rooms that you are not invited to. So if you are working within a vacuum, I sort of look at it like, tree falls in the woods and nobody's there. Did it happen? Did it hear it? No. So that's huge. And then, knowing what you want to do next, it doesn't mean that you need to have a 5-year plan. I mean, I'm sort of struggling with that myself actually right now. So I think it's more knowing what you want to learn next, knowing sort of how and where you might want to grow. What do you need to do working backwards to orient yourself towards there? And usually that means, what relationships do you need to build? Or what kind of exposure do you need to get? My partner, she's gotten really big into crypto, but it started with her just going to the Bitcoin conference in Miami. So to have a sense of like orienting yourself. And a good way to do that is to ask yourself where your company and where your industry is growing, and then align yourself with that work. You're going to have much more potential, both, within your own bank account and your career trajectory, if you're going where the company and the industry is growing. So I would say those are my top 3.
Thank you so much. I want to be respectful of your time and other people's time as well. You have been absolutely fantastic. Everyone needs to go out and buy your book, Ladies Get Paid, Claire Wasserman. Claire, thank you so much for sharing. She has her own web location, a lot of videos to watch. So please make sure you go out and continue the education. You've shared a lot of great thoughts with us today. Thank you.
Yes. And our annual conference, it's happening May 24th. We just launched it yesterday for the very first time. It is absolutely free. It's going to be fantastic. And so ladiesgetpaid.com, you'll get invited to our online network. We're still in Slack, but we're making the transition to a new platform called Circle. So when you join, you're going to be put into Circle. There's 3,000 women in there. So smaller, but equally great. And jobs channel. So if you're looking for work, we're coming out with a jobs board. So come on board, tell your friends, tell everybody. And best way to get in touch with me is not by email. So Sheila, this was like, fate that I actually saw your email and I responded, because that's, just giving me anxiety thinking about my inbox. So either on Instagram, that is probably the best way to actually hear back from me the quickest. So you can find me at Claire Gets Paid. And of course on LinkedIn as well. Thank you for having me, Sheila. And obviously we'll be in touch. We'd love to do more things with you all, and excited and honored that you spent your time with me today.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you everyone for joining us. This has been just a remarkable, inspirational visit today. Thank you. Bye now.